Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for tuning in. Wisteria here. So we're continuing with our werewolves, but we're going into the modern sort of age now. Finding ordinary explanations for some of those sightings that I mentioned in the previous episodes can prove difficult. Most of them, they do seem to be flesh and blood type creatures, but they're not creatures that should actually exist according to modern zoology. If what the eyewitnesses say is true, then the folklore doesn't seem so far-fetched. But there's little evidence to support the modern accounts. A scratch on a car will not revolutionise modern science's view on lycanthropy. So we have to look elsewhere. We have to look at different explanations of physical werewolves. There is explanation for lycanthropy, but it's different. It's clinical. It's not fictional. It's very scientific. The case of Jean Grenier marked the approximate start of leniency and reason in werewolf court cases. Despite hearing a story that was familiar in court records, the officials decided that this time around the salve, a wolf killed and admissions of guilt, may not have meant that the devil was afoot. Grenier was ruled insane, and as a later visit to his monastery showed, that it was a rare good call on the part of court. Even without his magical implements, Grenier remained obsessed with the idea of being a wolf, and acted anything but sane in the last days. What's most amazing about clinical lycanthropy is that medical practitioners in the 2nd century CE knew of it. Yeah, they did. A good 1,400 years before the first court decisions of leniency towards people who thought they were werewolves, and over 1,000 years before mania and fear erupted, a doctor by the name of Marcellus of Sida not only wrote about clinical lycanthropy, but also tried to apply the medicine of the day towards getting a cure. Marcellus gave a few odd physical traits for his lycanthropes, including a listless gaze, dry tongue and eyes, gauntless. However, his real contribution was that he called lycanthropy a form of melancholy or mental disorder. He even had a bizarre cure involving bloodletting, days of baths with various substances, finishing off with sleep-inducing drugs. His techniques, they were odd. Those of the time, though. Bloodletting was used for nearly all ailments back then. But his insight that it was a mental disorder, that cannot be ignored. Looking at clinical lycanthropy, you can't ignore that. It's complicated as well. We can see that Marcellus was not ahead of his time in the curing department, but he was a pioneer in recognising a type of madness for what it was. The 16th century Dutchman of medicine also knew how to spot madness for what is called now lycanthropy cases. The doctor, Petrus Forestus, identified a particular peasant who every spring would run around in a wild state in a local church and cemetery. Interestingly, he was covered with types of scars that Marcellus predicted would appear in the most cases of lycanthropy. Forestus knew this man to be a lycanthrope of the clinical type, perhaps because Forestus had read Marcellus' words. We can't be sure how he knew, but the point remains that the courts had at their disposal papers written by so-called esteemed men of science. They ignored them. Why? What happened? It's hard to conceive of how many folkloric werewolves only suffered from a form of clinical lycanthropy. Even today, you can't in all cases point to something in a patient and determine that he or she has an isolated case of clinical lycanthropy. Psychological disorders, they're not always clear-cut. They do not always present themselves alone. Separating the symptoms from the causes can be quite challenging. The most obvious indication that someone may be suffering from clinical lycanthropy is they freely believe that he or she changes into a full werewolf. A good example of what might have been a clinical lycanthropy from yesteryear is a particular peasant, in human form, killed several people tore them apart. He was captured in 1541 in Pavia, Italy. Although his name is lost to history, he has particular notoriety of claiming at his trial that he was a werewolf, whose fur grew on the inside. Considering how heinous his murders were, the peasant was cruelly appeased by the court. They spared no time cutting him open in several places to see if he was telling the truth, but found no fur. Of course, psychology wasn't the only kind of medicine that was in its infancy in the day, and the peasant did not survive. If he was a clinical lycanthrope, his fur did, figuratively speaking, grow inside his mind. Today, clinical lycanthropy are usually diagnosed after they exhibit two major indications. The first is they are behaving like a wolf or an animal, and that can be dramatic to behold, trust me. The second is that they often can exit the mental state for a while and display awareness of their condition, almost like a werewolf in a movie who confesses to thinking he did something terrible in wolf form the night before. What could cause this condition? For all our increasing knowledge of science of the mind and our understanding of how neurotransmitters and chemical imbalances may affect behaviour, we still have no definite explanation for what could make someone feel he or she is a wolf or other animal. Zoanthropy, that's the term used when a patient believes he or she changes into another animal. But that's sort of looking then, let's look at the more sort of recent advances, I guess. Doctors studying the condition quickly come to the conclusion that clinical lycanthropy may have something to do with how a patient perceives themselves. Lycanthropy would not be alone in exploiting such a flaw. The human mind is proven to betray us in the respect with numerous other conditions. For example, some people feel they're way too fat, even moments before dying of anorexia. This kind of psychological condition, where a sufferer is concerned with a defect he or she believes is found in his or her body, is called body dysmorphic disorder, or body dysmorphia. I know about that because I have it. Could someone similar to BDD be at work with lycanthropy? Somewhat perception of appearance or physical nature that ventures into more animalistic imagined defects. In a 1999 paper it was entitled Lycanthropy, New Evidence of Its Origin, Dr. Hamdi F. Mosley reveals the details of a study that examined the regions of the brain that control proprioception, or one's sense of the relative positions of the body. What Dr. Mosley postulates is that we may be able to learn something about lycanthropes by analysing the proprioception regions, including the cerebellum, of course. He used neuroimaging techniques to analyse these regions in two clinical lycanthropes and found conclusive evidence to suggest unusual activity. Put simply, the parts of their brain can tell them they are humans of ordinary shape and size, or misfiring, which could cause these anomalies. That's still unknown, but it's a theory. Even if we find what causes one's sense of body image to be skewed from reality, we would still likely be faced with another puzzle. Why should such an anomaly manifest as a belief that one's turned into a wolf? There aren't people walking around and think they're turning into buildings or trees, but wolves, and a few other animals, including cats and birds, come up repeatedly. Rarely, sufferers will feel as if they transform from one animal shape to another. The principle of atavism may play a role here. Some people have genetic traits that reappear from a distant past. These throwbacks are atavistic traits. Long canine teeth could be genetic regression to a trait of ancient ancestors, as could extra nipples. Maybe our tendency to imagine we are animals is an extreme genetic throwback back to the evolutionary ladder. A simple theory was proposed by Cesare Lombroso in 1870s to explain criminal behaviour, but it never really caught on. Atavism as an explanation is speculation, but worth mentioning as a possible differentiator to why sufferers of the condition are called lycanthropes, and not something even stranger like skyscraper thropes, for example. So we have to look at true schizophrenia and notice the word true is a subsection. Ask most people on the street the word schizophrenia means. They'll tell you it's a person with multiple personalities. Everybody knows that. Surely you've heard jokes like, I have schizophrenia, and so do I. Let's just say that scientists have nothing to do with creating popular jokes. In fact, schizophrenia has nothing to do with multiple personalities. Schizophrenia is a disorder in which a patient exhibits distorted perceptions of reality. Fabricated perceptions can manifest in all 5 senses, although the most common symptoms of schizophrenia are visual and auditory hallucinations, because the voice has told me to is more apt. It's politically correct phrase to describe the disorder than the so do I joke. It could be that some lycanthropes actually suffer from schizophrenia and happen to randomly imagine wolves or other animals just often enough for the idea to consciously take hold. Wolves, in particular, are striking, dramatic creatures, and seeing one would stand out in memory. When, well, if there were a patient to imagine, the sound of a door slamming, then rain that isn't present, he or she would not be affected in any dramatic way, unless it was the person's first hallucinatory episode. Imagine, after such mundane hallucinations, that the patient is hungry and he has a howling wolf in his or her head. Such a seeming trivial coincidence could be noticed and take hold in a powerful way. I'm not a psychologist, really I'm not. But I'm not rambling either. Medical theories explaining lycanthropy have been put forth by the professionals. I'm just simplifying it to make it possible to explain what theories could be. And they are theories. They're highly intuitive though, adhering to the principle of Occam's razor. Simple explanations are often the best. There's nothing complex about connecting the disorder of imagining things and the idea that perhaps there's fur growing on the back of someone's hands. Dissociative identity disorder. Again, schizophrenia is not multiple personality disorder. That's MPD. Actually, MPD is not really MPD any longer. The more commonly used term is dissociative identity disorder, DID. It's actually a reasonable explanation for some clinical lycanthropy. One little caveat before we delve into it. For some doctors, DID is controversial. These professionals argue that everyone dissociates to some degree, and that extreme dissociation has to be an act. For example, next time you have nothing to do, pretend for 1 minute that you, who shows his or her face at school or work, or having a conversation with you, who has dinner with the family, if you give it a little while and really try to recreate these 2, or any of the 2, faces that you have put in your life, and let the dialogue flow, the result may be unsettling. Don't worry. No one has split into 2 identities as a result of this exercise. At least, I don't think they have. In all seriousness, let's try to make light of the disease because it's not truly detached from it. DID has affected someone very close, so although we can't share that sort of information because, well, it's private, it's not a good thing to have. For a disease that's controversial and difficult for some doctors to accept, and DID has had an agreed upon case or origin as far as the accepting doctors are concerned. Patients who suffer from DID and most often experience some type of trauma, usually at a young age, which cause their consciousness to fragment or disassociate. The trauma is often sexually abusive in nature, but can also be a result of some other violent action. Such dissociation does not always become apparent in the individual right away. Its traits may manifest immediately after the initial trauma, but could remain, well, dormant for years. The traits that I'm talking about, they can emerge all of a sudden in one way or another, personalities, alters, which were created by the dissociation that happened when they were younger, but sometimes it just doesn't happen for years. It's a way of protecting feelings. It's a way of wanting to protect the main personality from the memories of the traumatic event, or to prevent the main personality from experiencing similar situations in the future. They call each other by name usually, resulting in eerie statements. For example, say an alter was named Chase and was a ruffian of sorts. She might comment on why she recently took control. Jane couldn't handle what her boyfriend said to her, so I had to step in and kick his ass. How long such a takeover would last would depend on how safe things felt for the host's personality to be able to safely turn. Occasionally, an alter is usually primal or animal-like. This could be due to a particular brutal trauma that caused the initial disassociation, or could arise when the first created alter isn't affected at the protecting the host's personality. It's not uncommon for DID sufferers to gradually create new alters in response to life challenges they face. Critics have a hard time disputing how realistic and consistent alters can be in cases where even 6 or more are present. It almost stretches the limits of human acting ability to consciously handle such switches. DID patients can be aware of their alters, acting to varying degrees. Some patients claim they watch helpless when they're not in the driver's seat, so to speak. Some patients, however, exhibit a fugue states in which they can remember none of their actions while they're not in control. Neither sounds particularly pleasant to anybody, actually. But it's difficult to imagine a more frightening form of the condition than the fugue states. Imagine waking up in a strange location, no recollection of how you got there, or what you were doing, what you've done, in the minutes or even hours that have passed. The basic conditions of lycanthropy, acting like a wolf, and being able to talk about it later certainly match up to cases of DID, where one of the alters is blatantly primal being. In such cases, the primal alter may act as if it is something non-human, and another, more rational, after would take a role of observing this behaviour internally and discussing it with anyone who asks later on. That an alter can be aware of other alters is fascinating, as such information can be shared in a fugue state of its own, without the host personally even being aware of the actual discussion. Severe cases of DID with multiple alters, they are not common, but neither is clinical lycanthropy. As a result, DID is certainly a possible medical explanation for transformative behaviour, and DID has also been put forth as a possible explanation of demonic possession. We don't know that, though, do we? That's some theories like that. They are actually quite flawed, but it's interesting that they do try and put them there. To cure someone of DID, you need to integrate them. It's a controversial process. Everything with DID is controversial. Integration involves getting all the alters to blend together into the host personality, with the theory being that any strengths they possess would then be added to the host to avoid any further need for alters to exist. The cure for demonic possession is an exorcism, even if such a ritual is just psychodrama. It's a case of, he thinks, she thinks they need exorcising, perform the exorcism, they believe the faith's worked, everything's over, though they are not really possessed, but it's not that. They believe they are. They truly believe that they are. So you have to perform an exorcism because they truly believe that will work. It's all mind related, In summary, if the idea results in lycanthropic alter, the person would have to assimilate that animal nature into himself or herself at some point in order to be cured. And that is the modern day lycanthropy. It has nothing to do with changing into a freaking wolf and running around with fur and fangs and... No. It's in the mind. It's very much in the mind. when we come back, we'll look at the hypertrichosis, which is a condition also. And it's different to lycanthropy anyway. So that's why we'll look at it, because it is different. But yeah, true lycanthropy and all that stuff is a medical condition. They just don't know enough about it to categorise it. So it's all theories. That's all. Thank you for listening, and many blessings.